All right. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Day 2 of Techstars Startup Week Atlanta 2020. What a day 1 it was. My name is Joey Womack, founder of Goody Nation, and this particular session is around the intersection of large companies, corporations, and diverse-led startups. We're going to go a little bit of a kind of a fireside chat, wide-ranging discussion on how large companies can work with startups in terms of pilots, partnerships, kind of the nuances of dealing with relationships and humans and things of that nature. So I have an amazing set of guests joining me today. First up, we have Noel London, and then we also have Chris Rich. And so I cannot in any way, shape, or form give them justice in terms of doing their intro. So we're going to kick it to Noel first for her intro, and then we'll go to Chris.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey. And thanks for having us. Hi, everyone. My name is Noel London. I'm with Accenture on our ventures team, focused on open innovation. I sit in Atlanta. I serve our South Market unit, and I am helping to connect our clients with startups and incorporating startups into their innovation agendas. So really excited for the conversation today.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks for having me. My name is Chris Rich. I am founder of a company called Hawk as well as HPG. We are a security protection firm. I'm located here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm just excited to be here with you guys.
Awesome. And I am Joey Womack, again, founder of Goody Nation. We are closing the relationship gap for both diverse-led startups and social entrepreneurs. So essentially, research has shown that they are much less connected to those that work for some of the top companies, not only in Atlanta, but across the country. And so we make intentional connections to help to fill the revenue gap as well as the funding gap for those founders. All the attention as we go to Noel and Chris, I think a lot of attention typically in the startup space goes to funding, right? And again, we know that in many cases, the amount of companies on a startup's webpage, those logos serves as almost like a signal to investors. And in many cases, diverse-led startups don't have those logos. So when it comes to working with large companies, before we kind of go into the nuances, and Noel, I want to kick it to you first. Let's talk about ways that corporations or large companies can provide a little bit of value to startups outside of funding.
Yeah. Thanks, Joey. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head of when we're talking about startups growing and scaling, we're always talking about funding. And a big piece of that of building a company is customers. It's not just the funding, and usually your investors, especially investors in the Southeast, are really going to want to see customers before they're going to write checks. So I think that, we talk a lot about funding. I sit on Accenture Ventures, which is our corporate venture capital arm at Accenture. We do write checks in some cases where we think that there's opportunity for scale, but a lot of our work on the open innovation team is really about startup partnerships and joint go-to-market. So yes, we're writing checks, but really I think a lot of the value is less around that check size and a lot more around the access that we're actually able to provide to be that scale partner. So especially when we're talking about diverse-led founders or diverse-led companies, having access to networks, having access to customers, it can be just as valuable, if not more valuable, when thinking about growing a company.
Nice. Chris, I want to kick it to you. I mean, you sit on the other side of the fence, right? Yeah. How do you think about working with a large company? How do you think about approaching them, building those relationships, and ultimately, and we can get into this a little bit later on the second part of this around, how do you once you're in the door and you finish with a pilot, how do you take it to the next level?
Yeah, I think that's key. Everything that Noel stated as far as relationship capital and having champions within those customer segments that you're going after. Once you're in, that's half the battle. Then you have to execute. That's the other challenge that comes after that. When you won that contract or the opportunity to actually say, hey, we have a viable product. Can we do a pilot? Which, pilots that you should also charge for. Nothing's free. that's key. You've got to execute and you've got to nurture that relationship. So, prime example, I won't go too deep into it, but there's a customer that we're trying to turn into a channel partner. It's one customer that can give us multiple lines of business within their same customer segment. And, I don't want to go 7 a.m. breakfasts with this person, but I do it because they're our champion. So you've got to continuously nurture that relationship as well as execute once you're in the door. So it's huge, it's everything, and it could really change the dynamic of the company.
Chris, you bring up an amazing point there around the pricing. I actually want to dig into that a little bit, both with you and Noel. Before we get into that, if there's anyone who has questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll begin to intersperse them into the conversation throughout, but also at the end of this session. So, what I've seen in many cases in selling to with my previous startup, some of the largest companies in the world, and in working with the founders in our program, is there's that balance, that tension of working with these large companies, but also you don't want them to walk away because of the perceived thought that if you charge them too much money, that it's a wrap. And so if I don't land them, then my whole company is gonna kind of go away. So Chris, I want to kick it to you first on how do you think about, generally speaking, from a pricing perspective, and do you feel that pain a little bit, or did you feel it in the past?
Yeah, in the beginning, I would say we felt it a lot. We didn't know if we should charge our full rate that we know the services, are billed for usually to customers, or do we give them a discount? So we heard, conflicting direction around what to do around that, because you don't want to undervalue yourself. Companies are, regardless of size, will always, I think, look for a discount, but you have got to stay consistent. If you know that you're going to execute your service beyond what they're used to, I would say go for the market rate. What I know now, I probably wouldn't have discounted that, because you dig yourself into a hole and it's kind of hard to get out of that. I think when you discount, it's kind of hard to creep back up to what the rate should be. And then you can find yourself in a whole different situation, and that client can turn into a non-profitable client.
That's huge. That's huge. I don't know, Noel, any insights or advice in terms of pricing, or have you seen examples of companies doing it the right way, but also maybe not putting themselves in the right position?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because, as a startup, especially when you're working with corporates, you've got to protect yourself and you've got to protect your company. So, first off, always, looking for things like NDAs, ways to protect yourself off the bat. I would say what I've seen work well, when it works well, it's a partnership. It's a partnership to both sides. And so, on one hand, you do need to get a couple of those early wins and logos to be able to share those. So it's a very fine balance. But I would say, when it works best is when it's a partnership with that corporate. So if they're looking to kind of test something out with their customers, you working together with that corporate to come up with the pricing and the understanding and that strong partnership, so that you both know, hey, we're testing this out and how this goes, but the idea is that it scales and that there's a long tail to this. So I think, the transparent, having the strong relationship, having somebody that you trust within that corporate customer, so that you can, be open about kind of what that pricing looks like, and say, in this model, when we go to market together this first time, this is where I know I'm strong as the startup. This is where my platform's strong. My technology is strong. Hey, corporate, I'm partnering up with you because you're really good at XYZ piece. So really everybody understanding how they're coming to the table and designing the pricing and the structure from the beginning with that partnership in mind. So it's a lot less transactional. And also, they're investing in you. You are also investing in them.
That's good. That's good. I think, both of you all are hitting on the role of champions. And at the end of the day, a lot of this is about relationship building, the social capital of said champion. And I think, also in many cases, whether that champion, is diverse or not, or they look like the founder or not. Right. And so, Chris, you said about going to 7 a.m. coffees with a champion. From the founder perspective, from the diverse founder perspective, can you talk a little bit on how you think about working with champions, both maybe finding them cultivating that relationship both before the pilot and maybe, down the road?
Yeah, I would strongly suggest due diligence. If you're trying to meet Noelle because you want to meet with her because she's a key stakeholder for a large commercial property development, and they have 50 buildings in Atlanta, you want to know everything about her, where she's from, find some kind of connection with her, and definitely see if you can, meet with her in person. I love Zoom, but I hate it at the same time. But I think, in person conversation and meeting with them, ask them for lunch, take her to breakfast if she's free, and definitely try to build that connection. Because I think if you build that connection, it does become less transactional, as she stated. Because I've been on the side of Noelle, I've been on the other side as well, working with Humana and Mercer. And if I don't have that connection with that founder or that small business, it is just a number or transactional at that point. I don't have anything vested emotionally to want to see Joey win or to want to see Noelle win. So I think that's very important. Everything else, I think, customers also work with who they like. I know I did on that aspect of it. And I'd want to see you win. I want to work out, something for you that makes it worth your time. So that relationship to me is probably step one, right after, figuring out your model, something that brings value to that company as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Building off of that, Chris, I completely agree. I think that role of the champion is so important. And I've actually seen it work where what I'm seeing work well is almost having two different champions. So that one champion that, you're solving their key business challenge, that challenge in and out, and you're not just coming with a solution, you're coming with something that's solving their problem. And that person, really being able to eliminate those barriers to get you where you need to go. And then having that second champion that you can really bounce ideas off of to help you navigate. So you have this high level champion, and then you've got that person that knows the organization in and out. So once this champion says, hey, let's do this, let's kick off a pilot, that other person's really like, all right, these are the different levers to pull in: the legal person, the finance person that's going to make this work on the pricing, that really understands kind of how to bring the pieces together. So I've seen that work well. The other thing that I want to mention is a lot of times this is not this champion's number one job. So they're taking this on as kind of a side initiative. They're passionate about what you're doing, what you're building, but it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get it off, within the corporate and make it happen. And so I think whatever you can do to really help enable your champion makes it so much easier, so that you're kind of going to them and feeding them information. It's less, I have this cool thing and let's figure out what to do with it. And it's more, hey, I know your customer has this open opportunity and proposal, and I have a connection there. And so you're kind of, it's a partnership again. You're bringing them value and opening doors for them. But then you're also just kind of teeing up the information to make it as painless as possible to really push through those new pilots and POCs.
No, you're right. And then, Joe, I got a real life story. We had a premature opportunity. I think we had just launched, and it was with WeWork. And I think we were so hyper-focused, or I was very hyper-focused on developing a relationship with my point of contact. It became a great opportunity. But then after a while, that was my only champion in that company. And then she left and went to Dropbox. And so we literally were doing work with them in Atlanta and Miami at their locations. And then she left, and it literally stopped. But the positive, I think, of nurturing that relationship is she's now over the U.S. for Dropbox in that same role. So relationships are good, but I agree to Noelle's point. Definitely try to figure out new, additional champions if you can within the company.
No, that's really, really insightful, Noelle. So again, for context, when we say that diverse founders typically are much less well connected to those that work for top companies, and really it's really speaks to very specific functions that are more startup friendly in these large companies. So I think the prevailing thought is like up to like 60% less connected than their counterparts. Yeah. So now you're saying that you have to really develop two sets of relationships, and so in many cases it's difficult for a diverse founder, especially in Atlanta, to find one. Now in Atlanta, because of our city, it's not super difficult to find someone that works for Accenture or Home Depot or Coca-Cola. But I think where the nuances come into play is around the functions that are more startup friendly, right? So developing champions for two different people, I think for people in the audience, to understand that it's a little bit more difficult. And for startup founders in the audience, it's, hey, you got to do a little bit more around it. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, being on this side of it, I think as a founder, I've met so many through these cohorts, and a lot of them aren't very, good at networking. A lot of them they don't have that relationship capital or network. So you have introverted, founders. They have a hard time, trying to make those connections. So if they didn't have, thanks to Joey for many of his cohorts, I think they probably would never get these introductions to some of these corporations in the city. So, I think a big focus does need to be in that space a little bit more with some of the other industries. Think of commercial development. I know there's a couple that we're in talks with, and they're really focused on diversifying, the executives in those companies and trying to attract, people of color. So how do you even network with people, an executive level if their industry is not that diverse? But, it'd be a great, partner for someone that has a commercial based product. So, yeah.
And Joey, you've seen so much of this kind of come together between the companies in your cohorts and the relationships you've been building within the corporate community. I'd be curious to hear, how you're seeing this come together and any kind of pieces that you're seeing are working well and tips and tricks around that.
Yeah, when you said earlier around how it's a full-time side project for champions, I immediately thought back to Gooder when they got their first pilot with the airport, and I think it took about a year to make happen. I mean, no shade to the airport. I mean, it's government and we love government, but it's government. And so Gooder had an internal champion there, the person who I think was over sustainability at the time, who worked tremendously hard to make that a reality. And then that pilot was successful, and then it kind of blossomed from there. So, I mean, in some cases, it can take up to a year, maybe not necessarily a year for companies in particular, but it definitely takes a champion. I think I've seen honestly it go all ways, including my own experiences of dealing with large companies. I think there are some founders that do a really good job of taking a relationship and making it happen. They know how to work the system, so to speak. They know how to set up meetings and do sales and kind of, I'm not gonna say tease people along, but they give them what they need and kind of handle it in a professional way. And then so there are some that kind of struggle with understanding the nuances of the decision-making process of some of these large companies. So quick story, a few years ago, I was working with another organization, and they landed one of the top companies in the world as a customer. And long story short, the reason why this company was given the pilot was simply because one of the VPs could stand up in a meeting with some of the other VPs in the company and say, hey, I did this innovative new project. It was less about solving the problem of the company, but giving this particular person ammunition, so to speak, or social capital to get a promotion, right? That's a real thing with humans. Humans have various motives and things of that nature. And what I've seen in many cases, and I think this is where a champion that understands the nuances of an organization comes into play. Many diverse founders don't understand the thought process of someone who is looking to rise up the ranks pretty quickly at a large company. And so those that may have experience, maybe being in business school, they get it. Some of those diverse founders that don't, it's not as natural to them per se. So if you're looking to be a champion for a diverse founder, helping them to understand the the ropes to skip, or the quote unquote the ropes to know when it comes to working in a large company, and that'll help that diverse founder understand how to move forward. So I don't know if anybody's seen anything like that, but it's a thing.
I got introduced to it was 2 years ago, the founder of Rody, and I think they had he told me a similar story of how they got started with that service in the airport, and it was amazing. You know, he had a champion within the airline Delta, and they were very interested in the aspect of his service, and that one service pilot just grew. They're all over the place. So he said really that leader wanted to shine and wanted to do something different so he can get promoted. So you do have to be able to read situations, I think, of people, and then kind of figure out that opportunity. So that's amazing when you have those situations like that.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's a difficult thing when, especially if a founder, in particular, those, let's say if you're working on a social impact startup where you're so focused on the impact you want to make, you almost have a little bit of blinders on.
Yes.
You got to take a step back and say, hey, I'm dealing with humans here. And that's super difficult. And I think it's incumbent upon some of the champions, again, that work for large companies to help the founder understand this is how the game works, so to speak, and this is how it's played. But when you play it great, it's a beautiful thing, right? It's almost like watching Michael Jordan play out there. It's a beautiful thing. It plays out well. The large company, turns out they're super thankful. The person who's selling to you is thankful. You get to put that logo on your website. You use it to go raise some capital or bring in additional customers. It's just a beautiful thing. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that, or we can talk about some of the specifics of designing a really good kind of pilot. I don't know, Noel, if you have any thoughts on maybe and Chris as well, like when you sit around thinking about designing pilots, how long should it be? Is there a strategy to do it maybe a short term to get a long-term play, or do you go for the multi-year kind of commitment, or do you look at building in certain things in a contract to make it amenable to everybody?
Yeah, well, on the pilot design piece, I think going back just before we hop right into pilots, one thing that we as Accenture have done is launch a program called the Black Founders Development Program that's being led by our ventures team under Catherine Ross, who is our global open innovation lead. And so I think that was, seeing how sometimes when we're making these connections, they're falling and they're not necessarily, driving forward, they're losing momentum. And so thinking about, how do you design a program to provide access to founders of color around bringing, all of those different pieces of, how a corporate adds value. Yes, our team writes checks and does funding, but it's more around how are we providing mentorship to those founders so that they understand how to evolve the pitch for a corporate. It's not the same as, a startup investment pitch per se. How do you provide access to networks, especially at a place like Accenture, where we're working with most of the Fortune 100s today, and so I think designing those programs so that you are accounting for, it's not just about funding, it's not just about the pilot, it's about all of the different pieces coming together. So I think that's everything that we've been talking about so far is very much resonating when we're thinking about the launch of that new program. But around the pilot development side, again, I think designing pilots in a way where we're not losing momentum, but providing, in a short enough amount of time, how are we showing the value of this platform? I've had, some startups come and say, "Hey, let's write a report for a client of yours," and you're like, "That's not showing your platform." So I think designing a pilot in a way where you're able to show the value of your platform, you're able to show people what you can do, but not giving them everything so that they actually need to see the long tail. So being very thoughtful about how do you give a taste of what you can do for the company with still leaving the door open for kind of that longer term partnership. So that's very important. And I know yesterday there were a number of the corporate innovators and some of our other panels that were talking about how do you make the process easier on things like SOWs and master services agreements and that sort of a thing. I don't think that, I think there's a way to make that process a whole lot easier than it is today.
I agree. That's a whole another conversation. I think just, requirements, where if you do get in the door for some small founders or small startups, they probably can't afford the insurance requirements, or they don't have the track record to actually win that contract. And, not even thinking about payroll, so I think there's other ways I think that, some of these partners can help these founders down this road, because I remember there was a guy named Joey Womack once said, revenue over everything.
Oh, yes.
So, I would love to see, a program that's more focused around that, winning contracts. Okay, this is going to be a $500,000 contract. That payroll is going to be pretty high. So what are the steps to work around that? Just different avenues, I think, of, not just winning the customer, but also serving it and managing it financially. It would go a long way. So I've seen different hurdles and different situations like that pop up on that aspect of it after getting in the door. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and not to mention when the cash is actually delivered, right? In some cases, you're dealing with, again, this is a situation where, again, all startups, generally speaking, at the early onset, it's difficult in general to raise money. As a startup in general, but even more so for diverse-led startups. So many cases, they're trying to leverage corporate pilots as a way to fill the funding gap. And then when you do all the hard work, you've developed a relationship with champions, you've gotten endured, you've signed a contract, and then they're like, well, you got to wait 90 days to get the money or something to that effect. And again, this is a difficult situation for all companies. But in particular for diverse-led startups, people are this close to shutting the door, where they're checking every day for that wire transfer, for that check to arrive. So I think, there's opportunities for large companies when they know they're dealing with diverse startups in general, but also with diverse-led startups, but keep that in mind. And so I don't know, even Noelle or Chris, is there something you all think about? Is there a situation where maybe, are there deposits, or is there a certain type of structure in terms of payment that you all think about, or in a perfect world, do you think that can be implemented just from a cash flow standpoint?
Oh gosh, I think about it from both aspects. When I was with corporate and procurement, and their requirements is what it is, and I'm very flexible with most companies. But as a founder, it would be nice, I think if a company did come through a program such as Noelle's, and they know they're dealing with a startup that probably has, $20,000 in the bank, they can't wait 90 days to get that payment. So we're going to make some changes for that startup, or those group of startups that come in. Maybe they have a 30-day net instead of a 90-day net. Just some different ways they can kind of change it, because it can't just be black or white for every company, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're putting those startups through the same procurement process as you're putting a very large vendor, and it's a very different situation. So, having to go through a number of those requirements for, a company's you have to mitigate the risk, and that's why those pieces are in place. But at the same time, if we're talking about a pilot, creating a sandbox just so we can see, what does this look like? It's very challenging that a startup has to go through that same procurement process. So, if it's something where something that I have seen work well is, setting up kind of a separate pilot type procurement process that is time stamped or time blocked, I guess, so that you have a certain amount of time where you're treated as a pilot, so you're able to expedite some of those processes because you're piloting. But it's very clear, at the end of this time box, we're done with this pilot, and now you need to go through the formal procurement process. So I don't know that that's something that we're seeing a lot of today, but is something that I think would definitely be helpful to startups to have the ability to land these opportunities.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's an amazing idea. I think if you're gonna especially make a commitment to work with startups and then take the additional steps, say, hey, we're gonna work with diverse-led startups. Yeah, these are the type of programs that you should be thinking about throughout the company. And we know that every company is different. A little bit larger companies, maybe have more complex systems. Smaller large companies, maybe someone could just put it on a card and keep it moving, depending on how large that budget is and how they do their process. So. Yeah, that's an amazing recommendation, Noel. I think, there are some other things to think about as well. If you're a large company, thinking about, the whole ecosystem of working with diverse founders. So looping back, Noel, to something you said about Accenture, how you're looking at maybe helping diverse founders, in particular Black founders, maybe even get connected to some of your customers. I think that's an awesome thing for all large companies to think about. Not only, so the interesting part is not every large company works with other large companies, right? Mm-hmm. But in many cases, large companies, to something like, you didn't really say this, but you've dealt with procurement. They also have large vendors, and so there's those large vendors may be able to be customers of certain startups, right? And so, again, when we start thinking about being intentional and going the extra mile, maybe there is an opportunity for a company if the pilot goes well. So, Noel, what you just said, like creating a special process for getting in the door with a pilot. If that pilot goes well, trust in the startup goes up, then the large companies start opening up their doors or their Rolodex to some of their vendors who could maybe use this software as well. And that's how diverse-led startups and startups in general, but in particular, diverse-led startups may be able to win. So, I think another thing to look at is if you are doing things like making announcements on various initiatives that your company is doing around helping diverse startups, breaking that news with a diverse-led news source, working with a diverse-led PR firm to do it, hiring. I mean, you probably are using internal resources to develop creative, but if not, thinking about using diverse-led graphic design firm or something like that, that's kind of going the extra step and going and being intentional around using your influence to help out the entire business ecosystem as it relates to helping diverse founders. So those are just some of my early thoughts. I don't know. So if anybody in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in chat. We see Cynthia Curry down there, great friend of the ecosystem and to Goody Nation in general. But if anybody else has any questions, please put them in chat. Noel, Chris, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts or comments on anything.
That's it. No, thanks for having me. This was great dialogue. It was good to see you again, Noel.
Yeah, good to see you again too.
I mean, if before we kind of head out of here, want to allow you all a chance to see if there's anything else you have coming up in the future. I know, Noel, you alluded to the program for Black founders. Chris, I don't know if you have anything that you're working on or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a social project which I'm excited about. We started out pretty small with a developer here, a real estate developer, who was purposely trying to change a certain area that was overran with crime in South Atlanta by buying up some properties and putting affordable housing. But he needed us to come in and assist with trying to help around the crime issue and provide presence for security. That's kind of grown into another partnership out of Louisville, Kentucky, called the Louisville Healthcare Committee. And it's a nonprofit where the board members are CEO of Humana, Norton, and some other healthcare companies. And they had a similar idea, but it was solely focused on healthcare disparities in Black and brown communities. And so we met collectively And I think that group understands that, people can't think about healthcare unless they feel safe. They can't go outside and run because they're worried about gang members or getting shot. So we're actually gonna come together. They're supposed to announce in 2021 $55 million fund to kind of tackle this nationally. So we're going to actually partner with them on that initiative. So just excited on that social aspect of it.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's super cool. I think that's a great example of a lot of different types of stakeholders kind of coming together to solve a problem. That's awesome. That's awesome. Noelle, anything you all are working on?
No, I yes, but I would say, coming up, some of the things that we talked about just as it relates to this session is, we did announce the Black Founders Development Program. So looking forward to, getting further involved in that program, further involved in Atlanta. So stay tuned for that. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to, I think, supporting some of the things that you're up to, Joey, later in the fall, continuing to support there. And then Chris, I just love to hear, it's great to see just the traction of your company in the last couple of years, and kind of to have watched you all continue to grow. But curious if there's anything that we or some of the people that are listening in might be able to do to support your growth.
Oh, a lot of changes. I think with COVID, I think everyone had to pivot. Everyone had to pivot and kind of just fight through what was going on. So we actually developed a sister company, a new co, and I think that really opened up a lot of doors. So we are state licensed now. We have some different security innovative services that we're offering, and it's getting a lot of traction. So we're excited. I think COVID was a blessing in disguise, which is weird to say. But I do think there were some pros and cons to it in different ways.
Nice. And again, if there's anybody in the audience, if you have any questions, I see Manny, Diamond, Damon, is there anything you all want to ask? Definitely here. But there will be a replay. I'm sure Techstars will be sending out links on via YouTube and emails and things of that nature with it. But yeah, this is a great conversation, kind of like a few friends catching up at a coffee shop, virtually. But super. We really thank you. Thank everyone for your time. Noelle, Chris, this was awesome. For anyone else that's kind of tuned in, I'm actually moderating a session at 11. And then, Noelle, I don't know if there's a corporate innovation track coming up as well at 11 as well.
Yeah, we have so glad to hear about your 11 o'clock. I'll try and pop into that at some point. We have another session this afternoon on corporate innovation that is bringing in the startup perspective and in addition to Chris's, and bringing 4 companies from the ATDC to talk a little bit about how their businesses are evolving through COVID. Great company pitches there. I think we will hear from Verison, Barminder, Skintelligent, and Pointivo. So make sure to tune in there if you can. And it looks like Dana does have a question.
Yep. If you want to go ahead and type it in, Dana, but while you're doing that, the 11 a.m. session that I'm moderating is with Todd Connor, the founder of Bunker Labs, and also someone else's, Ben Morton from Chris's team, on the intersection of military veterans and the startup ecosystem. But to go to Dana's question, open innovation based on problems the corporations we're looking to solve. How can corporations engage diverse founders in such quote unquote hackathons? I don't know if anybody, Noelle, Chris, if you have any thoughts on.
I was actually going to say, Joey, I think that when I think of groups that are engaging corporates best in hackathons, I think what you've been doing with Goody Nation is a really good model.
Yeah.
Because it's not, a lot of times when coming out of hackathons, great ideas, but it's challenging to move them forward and kind of to take them to the next step. And I've been really impressed with what you've been doing to make the companies kind of get to the next step. Even gooder came out of the hackathon, right?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, one of the key things we've seen over the years is identifying that internal champion. Yeah, so exactly to your point earlier, what we were doing, or we are doing, we're finding internal champions that have a problem that needs to be solved. It's less about the person that needs to it's like the champion with the problem, and treating it like a relay race, right? And so then reverse engineering that process and saying, okay, here's a problem for organization X. Here's the champion that's experiencing this problem. Here is the criteria to solve the problem. And we say to the companies, if all these criteria are met, then you move ahead with a pilot with the winner of the hackathon. And by the way, the founders participating in this hackathon they must be diverse, or at least one person from the founding team must be diverse, right? And so that's how we've experienced some success. So the founding team, these startups have at least one diverse founder. The winner coming out of the hackathons, they check all the boxes, and then we just hand them off to the champion, and the champion does what they do best, right? And so in the best case scenario, that champion is a person, again, that experiences the problem, and they're the person that understands the nuances of the organization. If that doesn't happen, thinking about it, some of our experiences, we do try to identify a second person that can help the founder or the startup kind of navigate it. But that's how we've been able to do. So Gooder got into the airport. If you actually use the Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson official app, that came from a program that we worked on. So that app had to be redesigned and things of that nature. And there's been several other examples as well. So it's an amazing opportunity. And I think, to what something Chris just said, because of the pandemic and now, geography and getting busy corporate people to come out to a physical location through Atlanta traffic is less of an issue. I think this opens up the doors to doing virtual open innovation hackathon sessions and solve problems, not only for the company, but also gives diverse founders in particular, but all startup founders, a chance to get their foot in the door.
Yeah. And when I think about, I remember us talking about the airport hackathon a while back, and I remember what I found really interesting about your model is you're not just staying up all night over a weekend and then coming out on the other end with a solution. But I think I remembered that you were spending about a month with the airport and with the customer to really understand the problem. And so everyone that is involved in the program is really understanding before they start solutioning, what's the challenge? What are kind of the nuances and why is this a problem? It's not just that, the stakeholder needs a new idea. It's the stakeholder needs someone to understand their problem and then to come back with something. And I don't know that I've necessarily seen that level of effort on the front end on many other hackathon programs. And I may be biased, but I feel like that's got to be partly the key on why you're seeing things moving forward.
Yeah. And to your point, we would spend a ton of time on the front end working with that champion, helping them to identify the problem. So it's interesting in that in many cases, just like when you're mentoring startup founders, they got a million things to do, and they may not necessarily know all the nuances of the problem they're working on. Same thing with these champions. So helping them, walking them through a process to kind of unpack the idea. Then we would have typically a panel session where they would explain the problem, why the problem exists, even potential ideas they may have to an audience of people. And then when we select the founders for the program, in the case of the airport, they spent it was a Saturday and a Sunday at ATL, walking around, interviewing customers or passengers. In this case, we gave them a space on site for them to kind of work and have even greater access to subject matter experts at ATL. Sent them back out into the world. We provided additional mentors. They could come back out to the airport any point in time for them to do additional, essentially, the customer discovery. and then did a series of pitch competitions to kind of refine the idea. So yeah, it was over a month. A month is that general balance between being a little bit too long and being too short, because we started out doing it over 5 days. But yeah, tons of work to go in to unpack that problem, to make sure essentially the handoff on the relay race is as smooth as possible, and the baton doesn't get dropped. But yeah, thanks, Dana. Great question. I think there's amazing potential in that moving forward. I don't know if there's anyone else has a question. I know we're at time, but and kind of closing up. Noel, Chris, is there any way that people may get in contact with you, or Twitter, I don't know, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok? I don't know what you're all on these days. So is there any kind of contact information or way people can follow you, Noel?
Sure. Yeah. I have not gotten into the TikTok dances yet, so can't find me there. But I would say LinkedIn is great. Twitter is great. So and then I'll pass along my email as well. But thanks for tuning in and joining. I know this has been a lot of fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, same. I'm not on TikTok or Snapchat, so I gotta ever get on those social platforms. But I'm definitely on LinkedIn. And I just shared my email in the chat box.
Awesome. And once again, I'm Joey Womack, founder of Goody Nation. You can find me primarily on LinkedIn, Joey Womack. Just drop a note and say like where you saw me from, just so I'll increase the likelihood of me. I'll actually improve. That's what it boils down to. Some people I get way too much stuff on there these days. But this is super helpful. Noelle just shared her email or Twitter and LinkedIn. But thank you all so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure that Techstars will share out the replay on this. So share, tell a friend to watch the replay, and we're going to get more diverse-led companies working with large organizations. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. And be sure to enjoy the rest of the of Startup Week.
Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Joey.